We need to talk about your dad.
Every evening from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., the Prime Minister of Canada was unavailable for anything. He came home to 24 Sussex and spent an hour and a half with us every night.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Yvonne Hunter, and I am the head of programming for the Appel Salon here at the Toronto Public Library. Tonight, I am delighted to welcome Liberal Party of Canada leader Justin Trudeau to the stage with his memoir, Common Ground, in conversation with CPAC's Catherine Clark. As an author, prior to coming to this stage, Justin has said that he wants Canadians to understand the life experiences that have shaped him and his values. And so tonight, we have a unique opportunity to share some personal insights with Justin Trudeau. Common Ground is a surprisingly candid memoir about some of the more painful episodes in Mr. Trudeau's life, but also touches on his aspirations for this country and why he cares. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Catherine Clark and Justin Trudeau.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being here. Thank you very much for the water.
You're very welcome.
You know, Justin, I'm really glad that I was able to bring out this crowd for you.
Well, I heard you're the son of a former Prime Minister, so that's usually a big draw.
Well, I was worried. I didn't think you were getting enough media lately, and I was worried you were feeling left out, and so I put out the call, and really, I'm pleased. Thanks, everybody, for helping. You know, I also have to note, I think I may have told you this story once, but Justin, a Christmas Day baby, and your brother, I was originally meant to be born on Halloween, October 31st. And my poor mother, she said, all I could think was, great, as if I don't get enough bad press already. Now they're going to say, 2 angels and a witch. So it goes back a long ways. I really enjoyed Common Ground. And I'm not just saying that. It's a good read, and it's informative, and it gives people a very clear sense of who you are as a person. I think it's incredible that you managed to get it done, given your schedule. But one of the things that interested me the most is that as political kids, we learn from a very early age to be private, because so little of our lives are in fact private, that you guard quite zealously those elements which are. So what was it like for you, Justin, to write a book that revealed not just about you, but that revealed elements of your life that were intensely private? The breakup of your parents' marriage, your own marriage, your brother's death, your mother's illness. What was that like for you?
That's a really good question. The fact is that my parents always walked a very careful line between public and private life. And I watched that line get crossed back and forth all the time, whether it was being on the family Christmas cards that's sent out every year, and having everyone see my picture as a kid, to watching people know more about my parents' breakup than I ever did at 7, 10 years old. So to a certain extent, I didn't really ever have the option in my life of saying, oh no, my life is private. And you can't know anything about it, because people knew an awful lot about it. So all through my life, I've focused much more on not trying to hide or keep private myself, but own the person I am and share that in a very strong way with anyone that I met. So it never bothered me that people knew what went on in my life. I mean, to be quite frank, there's not many people in this world lucky enough to have 30 million people to lean on when you lose your dad or your brother. And I got to do that. And I understood the tremendous benefits that could come with being publicly known. But I also knew the challenges that went with it. And the biggest challenge was always understanding there were people out there who disliked me intensely through no fault of my own and no responsibility of my own, but they disliked my father or my mother and lay that upon me. And I had to learn from an early age not to respond or not to react to that kind of perception or attacks. But at the same time, I had to learn not to believe the wonderful, very nice people who loved me because they loved my father. Because if you're going to push aside one, well, you have to be intellectually honest enough to push aside the other. So despite all the public knowledge that people had of me, I also knew that anyone I met, despite all the public knowledge they have, would need to learn who I actually was. It happened either one of two ways. Either someone came to me knowing exactly who I was, and I had to work to shift their perception so that it would line up more with who I actually am, or I maybe got a few hours or a few days or sometimes a few weeks before the person made the connection as to what my last name was, and I could hope that my own personality and my identity would have shone through enough to be able to push back against the discovery. So for me, the extension of actually sharing these stories that were how I was shaped by the collection of my experiences is not something different than what I've had to do all my life. I mean, the number one question I ever got as a kid was, or even as a young adult, was, well, what's it like to grow up son of a prime minister? So answering that question in this book was very much an extension of something that I've been challenged to do all my life, but that I think I've gotten reasonably comfortable at. And I understand that particularly since next year I'm going to be asking people to make a fairly big decision about who they want to be their next prime minister. I think sharing the details and the stories of how my collected experiences have shaped me and informed my vision for this country is not a difficult process. It was a lot of hard work, but is ultimately a very rewarding one that I found very much an extension of the kind of openness and sharing of my story that I've done thousands of times throughout my life with many amazing Canadians.
I always love the question, what was it like growing up as the son or daughter of a prime minister? Because, well, it is a very unique way to grow up, and yet they're still just your parent. And they still discipline you or laugh with you or take you to the movies. Was that your experience too?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you look at your dad and you're not saying, "Good morning, Prime Minister." You're saying,
No.
"Hey,
No,
Dad, pass the milk."
And at the same time, I mean, he didn't come home and sit around the dinner table and say, "Oh man, René Lévesque really gave me a hard time today." He was Dad. He took us for hikes in the woods, taught us how to J-stroke a canoe, how to live our lives, and he tisked when we watched too many Saturday morning cartoons, and he encouraged us to read better books, and there was a level of normalcy about that was totally relatable with all my friends and their parents. And indeed, my biggest challenge, which was how to define myself and learn myself as an individual and become myself and discover my path, is not so incredibly different from anyone who's had a successful parent who wants them to do a certain thing or expects them to follow in the family business, or which my father didn't. But we are all, as children, in the presence of parents who loom large over us, and that balance of how much we try to be like them and how much we try to be unlike them is what shape us. And that experience is certainly something that is universal, even though the actual job description was, to a fairly select circle of you, me, Ben Mulrooney, and our siblings. And now Ben and Rachel.
So you were talking about your dad trying to get you to read better books, and this is probably the right audience to bring up the fact that he didn't actually like your taste in books.
Yeah. I've been an avid reader all my life, and it started with kids' books and rapidly moved into C.S. Lewis and the Narnia Chronicles, and then as I got a little older, I said, "Mom, I want a real book," and she gave me Gone with the Wind, which, much to my dad's despair, I read the summer he had retired from politics and we were touring through the Gaspé in the family car. I've always been enchanted and enthralled by storytelling, by the story arc, by character development, by the potential of the young hero who then goes on to become a great knight or a world conqueror or just a powerful and impactful human being in their community. And that idea of character development was, for me, what was most fascinating with books. And yes, I read the classics that my father foisted upon me. But I also...
Come on, get to it, Justin.
Yeah, I also read an awful lot of Stephen King. I'm not scared. I also read an awful lot of Stephen King. I also read an awful lot of Robert Heinlein. I also read an awful lot of any number of books that for me challenged what's around the corners of our mundane reality. And we could say, oh yes, Garcia Marquez was wonderful with his magical realism and that idea of portraying natural. I said, yes, I love Garcia Marquez. He's just like Stephen King. And my father, of course, despaired. But that idea of storytelling and shaping a narrative and the development of a character rather than presenting the final fait accompli, the final set of facts that you read in an encyclopedia or an atlas or a dictionary or a nature book, or a biography that even, well, biography you get a little more character development, but still the obsession with facts was greater for my father and my brother than for me, whereas I am very much interested in facts and reality, I also would choose to discover more about people, which I found much easier to do and much more satisfying to do through the lens of a thoughtful author who'd done the research and explored the edges of the human condition. And that's what enchanted me.
On a more serious note, one of the things that you discuss in the book is your mom's illness. And she struggled terribly at a time when no one talked about mental illness. And I can speak from personal experience that when you are a woman, and I watched this with my mom, who may not fit the conventional standard of what people expect a political wife to be, and certainly in that day and age, it was a very specific expectation. The road is even harder. Your mom has talked about her illness, and she's written about it, but you were writing about it from your perspective. Were you worried about how she would feel when you talked about what you had gone through as a kid because of her illness?
A little bit, because I love my mom very much and I don't want to hurt her. But at the same time, I was very much inspired by her, inspired by her own courage in stepping forward and sharing this. I don't know that I could have written any book, let alone the book that I wrote, if she hadn't been incredibly brave and candid in her own memoir, Changing My Mind, that she put out a few years ago and has continued to work across the country to destigmatize mental illness, to share her own challenges with that. And that level of candor and strength was something that, to be quite honest, really, truly taught me a lot about the strength that can come through vulnerability. My dad was, yeah, thank you. My dad was always incredibly strong because he was tough, the toughest, smartest guy in the room. He could handle any situation. My mom showed me what true toughness and true courage is, which is the courage to share your vulnerability, to share your uncertainties, to share your struggles, and know that with that sharing, you can have a positive impact and help many people. So for me to share my story as a kid, growing up in that situation, I think was really important. And as I look back, and I didn't even write it in the book, because it was only thinking about it afterwards, where I realized that I didn't find out until I was well into my mid-20s that my mother had struggled with mental illness all through my childhood. And it was an offhand comment that she made at one point. We were looking through a book of old pictures, and she had a really short haircut and was looking a little skinny. And I said, "Oh, Mom, that's not a great look for you." She says, "Yes, I was really battling depression hard, during that phase." And I sort of went, "Oh, really?" And I didn't ask her about it on that moment, but I had never labeled or seen her label anything that she went through other than just, "Oh, it was a very difficult situation. Your father was much older. We were incompatible. I needed to get away. I was unhappy." Not, "I had a mental illness." And I think that courage that she showed in coming forward and sharing that story, and also a desire that I had to push back against all those people out there who think they're insulting me when they say, "Oh, you know, he's much more Maggie's son than Pierre's." Let me tell you how proud I am of being my mother's son, every bit as much as I am my father. And anyone who tosses a similar accusation, well, two things. First of all, don't understand how extraordinary, how brilliant, how wonderful, how incredible my mother is. And two, is saying much more about themselves and their own insecurities and bigotry than they are about me. And that's where I'll leave that.
I had the opportunity to interview your mom late this past winter in her home. And what struck me, we were talking about 24 Sussex, and what struck me was how, first of all, how candid she is, which I'll tell you is, for someone in my business, is a dream come true. But she's entertaining and lovely, and she adores her grandchildren. And what has the presence of your children and Sasha's children in her life, how has that changed your family? How has it changed her, and how has it changed your family for you too as well?
We lost my little brother Mish in the fall of '98. And for the next 5 years, my mom was broken. Losing a child is inconceivable to me. Even though I lost a younger brother, I can't imagine how much it would have hurt to lose a child, because I look at my own kids and say, I can't even think of it, and I choose not to think of it. But, I mean, and it broke my father permanently. He gave up on life at that point, or over the following 2 years. At the end of those 5 years, when Mom was starting to come out of it, I met Sophie, and my brother Alexandre met his to-be wife Zoe, and we started having kids. And my mom went from being a mom to a grandmother of 7 in 7 years. And it has transformed our entire family. She is an active, wonderful, present grandma who lives in Montreal, so she's always around my brother and his 3 kids, and she comes back regularly to visit in Ottawa with me and my 3 kids and my half-brother Kyle and his daughter. And it's just an amazing dynamic to have. It's perhaps best summarized by the fact that my son Xavier, he's now 7, but when he was littler, he had Grandma Estelle, who was Sophie's mom, and Margaret he couldn't quite say, so he just called her Grandma Yummy. And we said, well, why do you call her Yummy? Bonbon. She gives her candy. He gives candy all the time. So my mom is loving the spoiling of the grandkids, much to our despair from time to time. But it has injected a level of life and love and happiness in our life that is just extraordinary. And that old adage that my mom repeats all the time is increasingly true. She simply just shrugs and says, boy, if I knew how much fun having grandkids were, I would have had them first.
I'm glad to know your mom does that too. My mom had this rule in our household growing up where I was allowed 1 candy a week. And can you imagine how long I stared at the candy rack trying to choose what I would get? But now with my kids, I swear to God, it's like it's Halloween every day. And so I think it's just something about grandmas, frankly. We've talked a lot about your mom, and we need to talk about your dad, because it is inescapable that you were always introduced or described as well as the son of a former prime minister. So we hear about him as the politician, but you're the only person, you and your brother, who can tell us what he was like as a dad. What kind of a dad was he?
He has a reputation, or had a reputation as a politician, of being difficult and aloof and overpowering intellectually and extremely disciplined. And those elements shone through in the way he was generally, so that you also see bits of those as a dad. But what I remember clearest was he had a level of love and commitment to us that we never doubted. He demonstrated 1,000 different ways every single time we were with him. And it's great example. After my parents split up, my father shifted around his schedule a little bit so that every evening from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m., the Prime Minister of Canada was unavailable for anything, for votes, for meetings, for foreign dignitaries in for a state dinner. He came home to 24 Sussex and spent an hour and a half with us every night. And it was, you think about it in a kid's life, when we're that age, we get home from school, we play with the brothers a little bit, we had dinner at 5:30, 6 o'clock together, and then my father came home to have dessert with us, to play with us, maybe go for a swim, go play outside if it was nice, read us a story, and put us to bed. So it was an hour and a half that was just a small part of his day, but that filled our evening, and we went to sleep and he was there. And if we woke up in the middle of the night with a bad dream, we'd run into the study where he'd be working. If it was before midnight, if it was after midnight, he'd be asleep, and we'd go over and cuddle him in bed and tell us about the skeletons we'd seen or something. But he was incredibly present as a dad, and we'd every weekend spend time hiking in the woods, or canoeing, or spending time together playing. And it was a kind of active presence that deeply informed the way I am as a dad. But it also had the flip side of the intellectual side. I mean, I learned how to debate against my father. If we wanted to double the half hour of TV a week we were allowed as teenagers, so we could maybe get an hour, and this is serious, an hour of, no wonder I was reading a lot of easy books, then I had to stand and justify to him. If I wanted a slightly later bedtime, I had to argue it with him. If we wanted to do something, he would demand that we put forward rational arguments to demonstrate it, and he'd sort of counter them. And it was, let me tell you a secret. There's a few people out there who like to make great hay about the fact that I'm, in their minds, not as smart as my father, or not an intellectual, or not capable of the kind of thinking and deep thoughts that my father was capable of. I spent my entire life arguing, debating, learning in deep conversations about everything around the dinner table with him, on hikes in the woods, talking about philosophy, about history, wrapping our minds around big and small problems. And I'm not saying I learned everything that he had to teach, but I learned from that I can go toe-to-toe with anyone on an intellectual level and not be told by anyone that I can't live up to that. So I have no problem if anyone wants to try and come at me with that. Because, and that's a big part about politics, is your opponents try to define you. And that can have an impact in what the voters respond to. But what that should never have an impact in is how you actually define yourself. If you start believing what your opponents have to say about you, you're in big trouble. And it's sort of reassuring that my opponents have picked some obviously wrong-headed, in my mind anyway, approaches, because it allows me to shrug them off and not worry too much about what they say about me in any given day. And that's what my dad taught me. There we go. To loop it back to the question.
You know, what really interested me in this book was your admission that you and your dad were not very similar types of people, and that there was another person in your life who was a huge influence on you, whom we don't hear very much about, and that was your mom's dad, your grandfather, James Sinclair, who himself was a cabinet minister. Yeah. You called him Grandpa Jimmy?
Yeah.
What kind of an impact did he have on you?
You know, everyone forgets or focuses on the fact of who my father was, and they forget that my grandfather, Jimmy Sinclair, was a cabinet minister in Louis Saint Laurent's government. He was an MP for Vancouver North from 1940 to 1958. Actually, in his first years, from 1940 onwards, he was both a member of Parliament and a RCAF squadron leader fighting in World War II against the Nazis in North Africa. So the idea of service is one that I get, quite honestly, from both sides. And I can't help but wear this poppy and think about tomorrow without thinking of all the incredible stories that he told me. A great one is that we used to play cards. He taught us how to play cards. This game called Bank that was, I guess, suitable for little kids. It was fairly straightforward. And whenever he won, he'd shout, or whichever of us won would always become, the champ of the Western Desert. And we'd sort of laugh about it. Oh yeah, great, neat, catchy sounding phrase. Well, it wasn't until years later I realized the Western Desert was the Sahara, and it was where he had fought in World War II, and being the champ of the Western Desert actually means something in his story, in his life, and it wasn't just some cool-sounding phrase. And that relationship I had with him through the years until he died in '84, but also that I've discovered through the years from my mom telling stories, from my aunts telling stories of how he was as a politician, which was a much more of a people person than my father was. My father was great in front of 10,000 people, and he was very good one-on-one. But cocktail parties, not so good. Chit-chat, social situations, he wasn't very much at ease. And I draw a little more from my mom and from Jimmy in that I really enjoy meeting with people, listening to them, chatting, learning. And I believe that politics is about sharing a process and not just the finished product. And Jimmy's political approaches were very much more consistent with the person I am, and I dare say more consistent with what politics has become in the 21st century, where being connected and being approachable and being authentic in a genuine way is a little more relevant than it ever even has been.
Do you ever, I'm sure people have asked you this question before, but do you miss having that counsel from your dad, or even being able to say to your grandpa Jimmy, hey, look at me, I'm a lot like you. I'm a politician like you were. Do you wish that you'd had the opportunity to do that, or do you kind of keep them inside you anyways every day?
I keep them inside. I know my dad and my grandpa are looking down on me with big smiles on their faces, and that's great. But I do get that question from time to time. Do I miss their counsel? And if you had an hour with them, what would you ask them about? Would it be income splitting or fighter jets or women's
All
rights
the conversations
or whatever?
that regularly happen.
Well, no, but see,
Yeah.
this is what consumes my life these days. The fact is, I would love and do just about anything to get another hour, another day with my dad. I wouldn't spend any time talking about politics. That's for sure. I would talk about his grandkids. I'd talk about the life I'm leading and my hopes for the world that my kids are going to grow up in. I think that's partially because that's what's important, but also because I do feel that he shared with me not the answers, but the process. He shared with me a way of thinking about whatever challenge comes my way with both compassion and strength and courage and intellectual rigor. That means I'm fairly confident that I have a pretty good idea what his advice would be given any challenge that I'm facing right now. And to find it out and to verify, I just look deep inside myself, and that's the greatest gift he ever could have given me as a dad.
I'm going to move on to why you decided to get into politics. But it had struck me when I was thinking about this last night in particular that the one thing that none of us ever wants to do is to upset or shame our parents or cause them embarrassment or behave in a way that reflects poorly on them. And if your dad were around, I think you would have an even bigger burden, because you would always be concerned about, okay, I've said this or I'm making this decision, and people would turn to your dad and say, do you agree with what your son's doing, sir? Is there a certain freedom in knowing that you are your own person? You are accountable only to yourself and to the people who elected you and to your wife and your children?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, for sure. I mean, this will sound odd to say, but I don't think I could have delivered the eulogy for my father if he had still been alive. That's why I say it's an odd thing to say, because of course you're not going to, but his shadow loomed so large over our lives that, I mean, a lot has been noted. I mean, he was 51 years old when he had me. He was the age of most of my friends' grandparents. So he sort of skipped a generation. But if I were to be going through politics right now, doing what I'm doing right now with him, the age of Sophie's parents, and in his mid-60s now, yeah, that would be very strange. But would that have meant he was a politician in his 20s? And would he have done the same? I mean, you can confound yourselves in these sorts of things, but to a certain extent, it might have been easier to know that he was still around to defend the Trudeau legacy himself and not to wear it on my shoulders. So there's a couple of different ways of doing it. Mostly, I don't waste too much time thinking about those sorts of things, which is, I just focus on doing what I believe is right and necessary right now, and in terms of defending his legacy. I mean, there are reporters and pundits who love to parse out things and say, oh, his father would have disagreed with him on this issue or would have been the same on... We'll let historians worry about that and the legacy. I'm very much focused on what we need as a society, as a country, as a world, now and tomorrow, and not whether something done in the 70s was the right thing or needs to be replicated today. That's just a focus.
When you decided to run, and you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but my understanding from your book is that when you decided to run, you contacted the party, you said, I'm going to run, and this was after a lot of thought. And they basically said, okay. And then they weren't super thrilled with the riding that you chose. And it was essentially you and Sophie and a clipboard in parking lots trying to drum up support for your nomination.
Yeah.
What were you thinking?
Let's rewind a bit. I'd always known that the challenge in my life was going to do right, going to try and do right by everything I had received. And I knew, and my parents had impressed upon us as kids, that we were incredibly lucky. And that we shouldn't feel guilty about being luckier than some of our schoolmates or some friends of ours, because we lived in a bigger house or had opportunities. But we needed to feel a responsibility that came with that, to do right by what random good fortune had bestowed upon us. And that's what drove the three boys in different directions. Mish chose to be anonymous and move out to the West and be a mountain guide and a ski lift operator and a passionate lover of the wilderness in a way that detached from expectations and responsibility, but lived fully the outdoorsman side of my father in a way that Sash and I never did. My brother Sash, Alexandre, chose to turn inward as an intellectual and is a documentary filmmaker and writes books about important and crucial, pivotal things, whether it's conflicts around the world or rising powers. He's got a book on China that he's working on finishing right now. So there's a range of him wanting to put things out there and have an impact on the world that way. I chose to become a teacher because for me, being a teacher was a concrete way of making a big difference in the world around me. And yeah, people used to ask me, Justin, you could do anything. Why become a teacher? I said, well, the answer is in the question. If I can do anything, well, yeah, I'll become a teacher. Because what better, what more important? And that was the path that and I always said that maybe politics one day, but not until I had, written a book. I realized, okay, now I have. Or you run a company or had a demonstrable, powerful impact on my own in the world, separate from being the son up. Because I knew if I ever went near politics, which is why I was never a young liberal, I'd never paid my dues coming up through the ranks, which is part of why the party sort of said, what does he think he's doing? Except around 2006, when I was helping out with the Liberal Leadership Convention, I realized that I had skills when it came to retail politics that I'd inherited from my grandfather that meant that I was actually a good roll-up-the-sleeves retail politician, which was something my father never was particularly good at or interested in. So I realized there was a path for me into politics that was different from my father that would allow me to demonstrate that I brought something other than just a last name to the political world. So I knew this, but to be blunt about it, the party didn't. And when I sort of stepped forward and said, look, I very much like to run for the Liberal Party, they said, oh, that's all we need. Someone else who thinks they're entitled, who thinks they're going to be running on a name and come in and boss everyone around. And of course, that is not just not me, but it was anathema to the person my father was. But it was a nice learning experience for me about where people's expectations were. So I got to buckle down and demonstrate beyond a shadow of a doubt that I could win in politics without any help from the party that was my father's, or even from my father's name, because standing on a clipboard in a parking lot in a very sovereigntist riding where there's lots of new Canadians who had arrived since my father had been Prime Minister was not banking on my name or reputation. And indeed, the pundits and columnists out there universally said the fact that Trudeau stepping forward in Papineau is conclusive proof that he's nowhere near as great a politician as his father won, because he's picked a totally unwinnable riding. He'll never win the nomination. He'll never win the election against a strong Bloc Québécois incumbent anyway. So, there we go. He's not his father's son. And then, of course, I rolled up my sleeves and I won that nomination. And then I won that election, and I did it by putting forward the kind of hard work and grassroots work that, to be quite honest, has the Liberal Party doing better than it should be by any accounts, because we just went through 12 years of serious decline in every possible election. And the fact that we're now poised to do incredibly well, and perhaps even I'm sort of counting on it, replacing this government in the next election, thank you, is because we have understood that the Liberal Party took Canadians for granted, turned inwards rather than outwards, and needed to do the work of building up the party from the bottom up, which is why I felt that I do have something to offer the party. And those people who think it's just a name are making a mistake in how they see the rise of the Liberal Party. But they're telling that themselves. They're whistling past the graveyard because things are going very well for us.
And I think we should be clear that you didn't just win the nomination and the election. You also won re-election in a leadership. So you do have...
I keep randomly stumbling into these things. I mean, for someone who doesn't seem to be thinking things through and is deeply over my head, apparently, I keep getting really lucky in all these contests. Who knows? Maybe there's a pattern there, but maybe it's just a fluke. Okay, we have someone here. Hello, sir. No, sorry, guys. No, security, please stop. Guys, can you... Yes, hello. Well, turn it around so people can see it. Thank you. Okay, please, take 2 seconds, take a minute to explain to people your position, and then we'll get back to this.
Energy for the equivalent of 7 million cars on the road. Canada will fail every climate target if it goes through. As a young person, I want you, Mr. Trudeau, to call for a full climate review of Energy East, because climate is part of the environment and it's damn well part of my future. So
thank you very much.
Please sign the people's climate intervention and please act meaningfully on the climate.
Thank you. Everyone give a round of applause for these young people. Thank you for being here.
And our rivers and lakes.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you. Good. So I'll take that, Catherine, as a question on the environment.
Thank you for taking that question on the environment.
No, it's my pleasure. One of the things that is a cause for real concern amongst Canadians generally is the fact that we have a government that, on the first part, doesn't seem to understand that a strong economy can only be built alongside a sustainable environment, that there is no choice to be made between a sustainable, protected environment and ecosystems and a prosperous economy. That division is gone. We can only build the two properly integrated and together. And one of the things that we've seen is there is a sense that our governments, and perhaps even successive governments, have not put at the forefront their concern for Canadians' long-term well-being. That the drive to short-term profits and immediate success and returns on investment is a political imperative in order to win the next election. And nobody is now thinking about what's the impact on another decade, what's the impact on another generation. And one of the things that we need to restore is that bond of confidence, of trust that governments are actually looking out for our interests as citizens. And that happens by responsible, transparent processes by which pipeline projects or energy infrastructure is reviewed and analyzed and presented to Canadians. This government has made the mistake of putting its thumb on the scale, being more of a cheerleader for certain projects than a referee. When what we understand now is that even though governments grant permits, only communities can grant permission. And social license is an inevitable part of any particularly large-scale project on energy resources or anything else. And citizens have a right and a need to be informed, consulted, and approving, largely and generally, of initiatives. But at the same time, we all know we need jobs. We need an economy that works. We just don't want it to come at the cost of our children and grandchildren. And getting that balance right is the job of a democratically elected government. And that is my promise and commitment, that I will build an economy that is anchored in a long-term view of what is best for Canadians now and for generations to come, by respecting the environment and the ecosystem services that we rely on to create that economy. Thank you very much.
I want to get to some questions from our audience. There are two. First of all, I'd like to know, though, I want to talk really briefly about Sophie, because she's an important element of your life and your path moving forward, because you have seen what politics can do to families. So what was the kind of conversation that you had with Sophie that convinced her that this was going to be a good idea?
First of all, she doesn't remember that conversation. Or says I completely misrepresented what it was actually going to involve. Sometimes. What it came down to with her was a reflection that it would be selfish of me, of us, to not do this. And there are days and weeks where she wishes she had been a little more selfish. But she has, and this is one of the things that drew me to her, she has a similar sense of responsibility. If you can have an impact on the world, then you have to. If you have a capacity to draw people together and to serve in meaningful and important ways, then you should. And ultimately, she was the one who reminded me and reminds me that it's not in spite of our kids that we're in politics. It's because of them. And having that as a touchstone, having her as someone who reminds me to not spend too much time in the back and forth, the attacks, the pettiness of what seems urgent, and instead stay focused on what is important, on the difference I'm making in our kids' families and our kids' lives. That's the only thing that justifies the amount of time I spend away from our kids, the long hours I work, the challenges of a marriage that sometimes feels like a long-distance relationship. We are in this together. We believe deeply in what we're doing, but she is a powerful grounder and check and balance on me as to why and how I'm doing what I'm doing. And I am incredibly blessed to have such an extraordinary and wonderful partner in my life, because my father, for all the brilliance and wonderfulness of my mom, never saw her as a partner in his life projects. And that was the one thing that I knew I would need if I was going to not make the same mistakes my father made, but make all new ones of my own. And I would need someone like Sophie. No, not someone like Sophie. I would need Sophie to get through this, and that's, to go back to the book, why I dedicated the book to her.
Final question. Is this worth it? Is all of this worth it? Of everything that you're going through and the long-distance relationship with your wife and not seeing your kids every night? Is it worth it to be doing this?
That's the easiest question you've asked me all night. And it's not just the sense that maybe we're going to be able to form a better government for Canada next year, which would make it worth it. It's worth it. Seeing a room filled with people tonight, of people who come out believing that our world can be better and that we can be part of building a better change and a better future for our kids. Every day I go out to political events where, at a time of tremendous cynicism and negativity around politics, people still come up to me hopeful that I might represent something away from the negativity, the nastiness, the disempowerment that characterizes politics at the federal level so often. And if I manage to demonstrate that attack ads are not the only way to win an election, then boy, oh boy, will it all have been worth it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Catherine.
Always a pleasure to chat. I know that there will be people here in the audience who have questions, and now's your chance. And I would ask that you just line up in the center here where the microphone is, and I ask two other things of you. First, that you state your name, and second, that you have a question. Go ahead.
And we're also going to do a book signing afterwards.
Yes.
I don't want to keep everyone super late, so I'll take a few questions, and I'd love to take more, but we're going to have to try and know that the more questions we take, the more some of you are going to have to stay
Babysitters
here
to get
later
home too,
and
yep.
pay the babysitter.
And I get to
$2.
be the person who says no more questions, so you can hate me and not Justin. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Jean Robinson, and I'd like to thank you for this evening. My question is, what is your opinion of this government's decision to prorogue Parliament not once but twice?
Prorogation is a tool that is actually regularly used by majority governments who need to hit the reset button. You put out a new throne speech, you sort of reset the legislative agenda, and this government used it most recently last year in a reasonably appropriate way. They delayed the return of Parliament longer than they needed to. They could have prorogued for a day, instead they prorogued for a number of weeks. The problem with prorogation is when it's used for blatantly political means of trying to avoid a confidence vote or dodge difficult questions or survive as a government, which is what they did. And that's not at all in keeping with our parliamentary traditions and our responsibility. But you know, as we look at all the different things this government has done over the past years, whether it's cutting the long-form census, whether it's a tax and cuts on veteran services, whether it's the way it shuts down debate, whether it's attacking anyone who tends to be critical, whether it's an officer of parliament or a media organization or an outside expert, we have to remember that they won a majority government in 2011 that was triggered, an election that was triggered on the fact that for the first time in the history of Westminster democracies, a sitting government was found to have been in contempt of Parliament. So they demonstrated absolute contempt for the institution that gives them their legitimacy and power, and then they turn around and win bigger than they ever had before. You can sort of understand that they think they can get away with this stuff. Well, I know from having spoken with many Canadians across this country, whether it comes to prorogation or omnibus bills or transparency, secrecy, and accountability, Canadians are not going to make that mistake again. So thank you very much for your question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wish you every success.
Good evening, Susan Garnett, and it's an easy question. I know, or I hope everyone in this room and all Canadians will take 2 minutes silence tomorrow to honor our veterans and the greatest generation. I just wondered how you were going to mark the day and where you will be honoring Jimmy Sinclair.
Over the past couple of years, I have been both in my riding and last year I went to Beechwood Cemetery, which is in the process of becoming our national cemetery for war heroes. And I would wander around the grave sites with my friend Andy Leslie, who is a former general and is going to be our next candidate in Ottawa Orleans, and I'm excited to bring him onto the team. But the fact is that this year, even though I would love to be there with the veterans, I'm instead going to be with so many other Canadians at our National War Memorial, the Cenotaph in Ottawa, where Corporal Cirillo lost his life a few weeks ago, standing guard for those we honor every November 11th and hopefully every year, and every day of every year. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a journalist, so I just thought I'd squeak in a question because I know you're not doing interviews tonight. So,
I thought this was an interview, but okay. Sorry, I'm not doing an interview with you, Zach. Yeah.
Okay. But I'd just like you to address the, I guess you didn't see the banner, but it was Toronto350.org, and they were had a banner about Energy East, the tar sands Trans-Canada pipeline. Through, a 40-year-old pipeline for 3,000 kilometers of it. You spoke about social license, and it was a really nice answer, but the thing is that Enbridge, TransCanada has been putting millions of dollars and lots of public relations effort into advertising, into manufacturing a social license. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, what is, without a nice glossy political answer, what is your exact position? What's your exact position on the TransCanada Keystone Pipeline? Are you for it? Are you against it? Why? Oh, sorry, the Energy East TransCanada Pipeline. Are you for it and against it? And how does that answer factor into the reality of climate change?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. First of all, everyone's worried about climate change. Well, everyone except this government, apparently, but we're all worried about it. And it's an incredibly complex challenge that we're facing that all countries in the world are going to have to be part of. And it's something that renders a lot of individuals really powerless. And I'm sorry, I'm giving you a glossy answer, but I think we need to understand this. That blocking certain pipelines and shutting down the oil sands has become a proxy for, you want to save the planet, this is something concrete you can do. Unfortunately, it's not that easy. You want my position on pipelines? I'll go right around the big pipelines we're talking about. Northern Gateway I'm opposed to because it's the wrong pipeline in the wrong place. Kinder Morgan has a process to go through, and I hope they're going to learn from Enbridge's mistakes around the Northern Gateway pipeline. Keystone XL pipeline, I'm actually in favor of, because it went through a public process and is going to be a help to us in terms of developing our economy and will be done in a responsible way. The Energy East pipeline, it's still going through a process, and I hope that process results in allaying some of the many fears that you're putting out, that Canadians have, and actually demonstrates the kind of social license that a project like this is going to need. One of the fundamental responsibilities of any Canadian Prime Minister or Canadian leader, and it goes back to fish and furs, it goes through grain and the railways, and now through natural resources and energy resources, is getting our resources to market. That's the responsibility of a Canadian government, because we have a big piece of our economy that will always be grounded in our natural resources. So how do we actually do that today is we do that through social license, through respect of Aboriginal peoples and title. We do that through making sure that the science and the oversight and regulations on these projects is protecting the interests of Canadians for the long term and not just the short-term interests of those companies or even the government. And in order to do that, we need a clear process which will determine whether or not that pipeline will happen. Because that's, as what I could see, what they're calling for, and that seems to be what you're calling for. Thank you very much, Zach.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take, and I regret this, we're going to take 2 more questions because we do have to let Justin sign a number of books tonight. So 2 more questions. You are next. Yes.
Hi.
You can probably pull the mic. You got it down?
It's okay.
Okay.
Okay. Hi, I'm Sally O'Keefe. Okay, so I'm writing a speech on feminism and specifically on the word itself. And I understand it's a word that a lot of people are almost afraid to use. I was just wondering, just out of curiosity, would you consider yourself a feminist?
And like so many other things that I look forward to you discovering, I actually discussed this in my book. I had great arguments when I was in the McGill Debating Union back in university with some very strong women who, about whether or not a man could actually be a feminist. And I think it really comes down to your own definition of feminism, but I think the egalitarian spirit that is at the heart of feminism means that, according to my definition, yes, I am absolutely a feminist and proud to be so.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Emily Morrison, and as a young, hopeful politician, and maybe somebody who might be there when you retire, when you're ready, I was just...
I look forward to it. I look forward to it.
I was just curious to know, what have you learned from Canadians on your journey in the past couple of years, and something that has, what have you taken away from talking to all of us on your travels?
That Canadians are constantly underestimated by the political class. That Canadians are worthy of trust. That Canadians are worthy of long, complex answers to difficult questions, and not sound bites and not worthy of being talked down to. The Canadians want to trust politicians once again, but would like to see politicians demonstrate trust for them before they do so. That Canadians are ultimately big-hearted, compassionate, ambitious people who know that life in Canada is not a zero-sum game. That means that there's enough success for all of us, that our one person's success doesn't need to come at the expense of anyone else, and anyone trying to tell you that it does is trying to sell you something. I am constantly inspired and encouraged and deeply touched and moved by the people I have the privilege of meeting every day across this country, and that leads me to make the promise that if I ever earn the trust of being able to serve Canadians at the highest level, that is something I will never forget. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Justin, and thank you also, ladies and gentlemen.